Listening back to this show from Teachers Talk Radio. You can catch up with all our shows by visiting our YouTube channel or by listening back at ttradio.org. Don't forget to like and subscribe to enjoy more live education conversation from TTR. We hope you enjoy this show.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Hello everyone, welcome to another show, another late show with me, Konstantinos Pappas. Welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. Tonight I am delighted to be hosting a conversation about teaching as scholarship and why great teaching actually deserves greater recognition in higher education. We often talk about research excellence in universities, but tonight, actually, we are going to focus on the intellectual, the creative and scholarly work that happens through teaching. And we are talking about evaluation, pedagogic research, educational leadership, teaching-focused careers, and the recognition of teaching excellence. I am really pleased to be joined by Dr. Frania Hall. Frania, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Amazing. Could you please introduce yourself to our listeners? Because you, if someone searches about you, you are the course leader of the MA Publishing at the University of the Arts, but you are so much more than this.
Oh, well, that's very, very kind of you to say. As teachers, obviously, we have multiple roles as it is, and that's something I'm sure we'll continue to discuss. But I am the course leader for MA Publishing, but I also teach on the undergraduate programme for journalism and publishing. And I have a role that sits in the media school, which is part of the London College of Communication. And in that role, I'm the teaching and learning lead, which is a sort of coordinator role or a sort of mediator role between the wider teaching and education sort of policy and practices. I mediate that, and any sort of activities that they're doing centrally, I mediate that into the media school.
Wow, that's impressive. I think we need another show just for all the work that you are doing to explain to us. That's very interesting. So, shall we start with the first theme, let's say, of our tonight's discussion? Let me take you to evaluation and teaching excellence. So, evaluation is often used, as a measure of teaching quality. How should we think about evaluation in higher education, and what can it realistically tell us about effective teaching?
Yes, well, it is very interesting because evaluation is something that I've spent some time sort of researching as part of my sort of teaching and learning role. And so I've spent a lot of time sort of thinking about that and what it means for the teaching and learning level, for the academics on the ground, the sort of grassroots, the people who are in the classroom. What does evaluation sort of mean? And it can be seen as quite often happening quite distantly, like centrally, sort of big documents are being prepared and there's evaluative material and impact is being assessed. But actually, to me, it's also meaning something that's happening in the classroom on a day-to-day basis. And we sort of want to understand what our impact is, to these individual students that we're working with, as much as the sort of the really big picture. So I think evaluation can tell us quite a lot. It can tell us the sort of straightforward impact. We could sort of see that attainment is improving, and we've been doing that in evaluating a unit recently. We've seen attainment improve year on year by percentage points, significant percentage points. But what we additionally know through the evaluation is that we know why. We know which things that we did, what strategies we put in place that were the things that had the impact to help improve that. So we've understand a lot more about what works, and building on that, meaning that we don't reinvent the wheel. So there's an iterative aspect to it. It's also about a way of getting much closer to the student experience, to understanding how students learn, so that it becomes quite important as a space for learning, as much as a sort of, perhaps what sometimes people see evaluation is as quite a sort of strict checking, performative sort of thing. But nevertheless, if you're doing all your evaluation carefully and thinking about how your teaching is going, and you're talking to students and you're having those conversations, then of course it is all about education enhancement, and that in turn leads to sort of policy, and it in turn leads to how you're going to spend money. It all comes back to you understanding, what works and why it works.
I see. You've touched on many important aspects like impact. You mentioned also attainment and how evaluation actually helps us improve, enhance attainment rates through significant percentages, as you said.
Mm.
So one of the tools, let's say, at our disposal for evaluation is student surveys. But beyond student surveys, what forms of evidence best demonstrate teaching excellence and educational impact according to you?
Yeah, well, it is interesting, the whole surveys thing, because I've looked into that, and I know some academics call them the happy sheets, and they're the sort of tick boxes, and they have a lot of limitations. They're a snapshot in time. They're whether somebody's feeling good or bad at that moment. They're only as sort of strong as whatever last happened. So there are some downsides to surveys, but of course, we're always going to have surveys. But by adding in what I sort of feel are much more rich qualitative approaches, you do build that deeper picture. And we have worked with a framework where we've sort of looked at a way of developing evaluation that becomes very empowering for staff to use, so they can see how their own teaching practice is going, but it's still robust. So some of the examples would be using Padlets, sort of within class situations, post-it notes as a really quick, inspirational way. We've done an interesting project where we've looked at mapping the route to an assessment, so that students work with you. You do the assessment brief. You then do a sort of online mapping using Miro or something like that, and you sort of say, how are you going to actually reach that end point? What are going to be your milestones? Let's collectively all think about what the milestones might be. And in that sense, you've done something which is very teaching-y oriented. It's something about create your own, personalize your own milestones, but you've also got a lot of knowledge about how the students are responding to an assessment brief. So it's those sorts of things that are really helpful, I think.
You are absolutely right. Yes, and I understand the hesitations when you mentioned that surveys, sometimes it doesn't give you the full picture. It might be just a glimpse at a certain time, and maybe the mood is not how it should be, let's say. I am wondering, yes, I think we all understand that sometimes students need an extra nudge, let's say, to participate to surveys, to fill in. I'm wondering, have you ever, how can I put it? Have you ever met with any kind of resistance from the teacher's side when it comes to launching the surveys to students?
Oh yeah. Oh yes. I mean, everybody's
okay.
slightly, if you're doing a survey, in a very traditional way, like a unit survey at the end of the unit, you know that all the staff sort of going to start thinking, their shoulders will slump. They'll start to feel like, oh, I've got to get another survey. Trying to get response rates. The students, for them, it's not a meaningful thing, particularly because although it's giving you information and it's something you can build into the next course, the iteration, and feeding back is, feeding forward, feeding back, is all of that's important. Nevertheless, it's you can see that staff sort of feel like, oh, we're going to be judged by that moment on that survey. It's going to be, I'm not going to get enough people to respond to it. And also surveys, they're not always inclusive. They perhaps need people to be writing quite a lot on the free text comments, and that's not necessarily the way a student wants to express themselves. And particularly as we're situated in a creative university, there are other creative ways to capture student feelings about things, like you could get them to take sort of photography and talk about their photography, for example, if they're photography students, and see what that represents to them. So I think the survey has, you definitely sort of part of your armory, your toolkit, but I definitely see these should be more ongoing conversations, and these evaluative moments or touch points, as I tend to talk about them, happening through a course rather than just that moment at the end. And I think for staff, it becomes a much more involving conversation with students. It's a slightly more partnership thing. And while for students, it feels slightly more meaningful as to why they're doing this. So like with that mapping example, it's meaningful to them to sort of think, how am I going to reach that end point of that survey? And yet you're getting evaluative information, but they're also getting something out of it, which is their reflective moment as well. So I think, as I say, the survey is always going to be there, but I think there's a lot of other methods that are quite rich and that play much more to how staff and students want to sort of, partner over this process.
Mm-hmm. Well, the way you frame it, ideally, it should be a win-win situation for the teacher, for the student, having the reflective moment, let's say the chance to express themselves, to reflect on their experience. So I'm wondering whether this takes us beyond evaluation and into a bigger conversation about scholarship. We talked also about teachers. So let me take you to another theme for our discussion, the teaching as scholarship. Because we often hear about research excellence in higher education. This is something like the given. But much less frequently, we hear about teaching excellence. So what does teaching as scholarship mean to you?
Yes, I think it's a really interesting question, because it's in any given point in time, you as a teacher are doing sort of two things. You've got your discipline approach, which for me would be publishing, and I've got my teaching sort of hat, which is also intellectual, has an element of sort of scholarship and research about it as you think about how to teach going sort of forward. So to me, it's a mixture of things. Teaching and scholarship. It's the pedagogical research. Like there are academic journals out there that specialize in education, and that's what some people do. But it's also what we do in the classroom. It's also about understanding the impact we have in the classroom, as well as the way we teach in the classroom. We're all sort of cross-disciplinary in that way, which can be sort of challenging. And teaching, research excellence, you put forward the things that you do in your discipline. You decide that you want to, write a journal article, whatever. In my area, publishing. But teaching, the TEF, the Teaching Excellence Framework, tends to be slightly more like you're asked for stuff that they need, rather than you sort of putting forward what you're doing in research. So, it's an interesting area that you're sort of negotiating. And that's why I'm quite, sort of passionate about this area, because I think that tutors are doing amazing things and they're innovating in the classroom all the time. But where does that sort of sit in this wider world of the Teaching Excellence Framework or teaching scholarship? Because you can feel like you're not part of the core teaching part, because you don't sit in a central education department, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you touched on all these important aspects. So I think I consider that there are many colleagues who are on teaching-focused pathways, who engage very successfully in innovation or educational leadership, pedagogic research, as you mentioned. What do you think? How has the nature of the teaching pathway evolved in recent years? Do we see any change in this pathway?
Well, it depends where you're talking about, because I think the teaching pathway is probably slightly more evolved in certain places than in other places, but it's quite, it is changing. I think there's a lot more recognition that anybody doing any discipline is actually also going to be doing something very interesting in the teaching sort of side of things. And I think that understanding that with the teaching pathway is becoming sort of clearer. whereas there was a feeling that teaching pathways are often just the slightly poor relation to the research pathway. Hopefully that's changing a little bit more, because we're sort of, well, in various ways, we're sort of encouraging people to perhaps think about their practice from an education angle. And I know that's something you think about your practice. It has a discipline aspect to it, but it also has a teaching practice aspect to it. I think there's a lot more recognition that people doing teaching things are doing interesting teaching scholarship, not just, oh, they're great teachers. They are the great teachers, but their skills and their continuous improvement about how they teach on a day-to-day basis is part of that teaching pathway. But it is still, I think, not sort of fully seen to be up there compared to the research pathway. And that's one of the jobs that I sort of think, well, evaluation can do that, but also encouraging people to be talking at education conferences, encouraging people to think about education journals, and it can still come from the discipline, but using those spaces as well, and sort of being recognised. Because I think it used to always be seen that the central team, the teaching and learning departments that sit at the centre of universities, were the place where they did that, wrote for journals or whatever, for education journals. And the rest of us didn't do that. But I think we can all do that, actually. And our teaching pathway is something to encourage people to do more of that and develop their own expertise. So like a colleague who's really looking at writing retreats, for example, that's actually developing very interesting understanding of a pedagogical practice that is alongside their discipline. But it does mean you feel you can be quite pulled in different ways, because you still got to do your discipline stuff. So I think there's still a lot to resolve on the teaching pathway to get that full respect, I think.
You mentioned some very interesting points. I do agree with what you say, that the mentality around, let's say, the teaching pathway has changed for the better. And universities have long time ago, but they keep on realizing the importance of informed teaching. As you said, not just being a great teacher, yes, but what about research on teaching pedagogy, on teaching approaches, in combination with another thing that you mentioned, with continuous improvement, continuous professional development, developing skills and all this. So from your experience, from your observations, what are some of the most exciting or maybe innovative developments that you have observed in teaching and learning across the sector?
I think there's a lot more going on around co-creation type projects, which is really exciting, particularly when you're at the sort of cutting edge of something that a lot of us are all learning together. So if you take something like AI, it's going to be difficult for a tutor to be sort of miles ahead of a student in terms of AI, because AI changes as quickly for everybody all the time. So actually co-creation environments are quite good. Let's all learn together, but steered, facilitated, spotting the critiques, all of that is brought by the lecturer into the room, while the students are sort of experimenting, and you're sort of framing it, helping them frame their experiments and things. So there's those sorts of things that are exciting. Projects that are very much sort of partnership, where you sort of set an exploration up, like we've recently done something on decolonizing the archive, where we've partnered with the library, with the MA students. We had a sort of a showcasing environment that was simulated in quite an interesting way in the first place, about choosing books and looking at them from different angles, from a post-colonial lenses. And then we created a publication, and students had a lot of freedom about what they chose and how they took that. Those sorts of environments I think are quite exciting, because they're learning through that experience of doing it, and feel quite a lot of agency as they learn. So that would be an example. There's another side of things. We've been looking at the option units, which run in your part of the university, where staff are really able to take their own research, build and draw it into a teaching environment. So it's research-led teaching, but have done it in lots of different ways, depending on where their specialisation is. They've been really creative about their course, like your own one on information, or there was one about comedy and communication, and the way everybody has taken those options and taken them in sort of different directions, really exciting. And when we did the research with the students, which the evaluation was about, they loved it. They could find things that they really suited them. There was a range of choices. Once they were in there, they felt a really intellectually stimulated, and also a sort of sense of belonging within that option. People did varieties of things through their teaching, from simulations, role plays, visits, discussions with different guests, great discussions, seminar situations. Each of those was really unique, and I just liked the idea of celebrating all of those individual sort of lecturers that have created these units, because that seems to me where sort of innovative teaching is really alive.
I'm really glad you mentioned all these great examples, because, sometimes some of our listeners or some colleagues, even at university, they may recognize those activities, but, perhaps they don't necessarily think of them as scholarly work.
Absolutely. I definitely agree with that. Yeah, people are innovative all the time, and yet they're not. Well, they might sort of know that they are being innovative. Sometimes they're not. It's just, this is how I do things, and I'm looking at them and thinking, wow, that's so innovative and so interesting, or so creative, or so engaging, or providing students with exciting experiences that are really helping them learn. And yet it's not being recognised, which comes back to the teaching pathway. We need to make sure that is being recognised.
Exactly. Yes, you are totally right. So we are going to take a very short break now for the latest Teachers Talk Radio news and messages from our supporters. Please do stay with us, because when we come back, I want to ask Frania about recognition, career pathways, and whether teaching-focused academics receive indeed the visibility they deserve.
As teachers, we know the barriers girls face go far beyond the classroom. That's why the FA and Barclays Made for This Game Breaking Barriers campaign is taking on two of the biggest barriers girls face today: misogyny and body confidence. Right now, 56% of teachers say they don't feel confident discussing these topics with their students, and that's exactly where this campaign can help. With free, easy-to-use resources and a podcast designed for busy teachers, Breaking Barriers gives you practical support to help start the conversations, creating more positive environments for girls in school, in sport, and beyond. It's time to empower girls to believe they belong. Go to girlsfootballinschools.org and click on Made for This Game.
In education, we all want recruitment to be fair and inclusive, because the gender pay gap won't disappear without clear, practical steps in how we hire. Recent national research shows schools are already taking meaningful action. 40% of leaders now include pay or progression details in adverts. 35% highlight well-being support, and around 1 in 5 are using anonymised shortlisting to reduce bias. Teaching vacancies, the Department for Education's free official job listing service, makes these steps easier, with clear salary fields, flexible working filters, and an application format that supports blind recruitment. It also removes previous salary questions, so candidates are assessed on their skills and experience rather than their past pay. For your next hire or your next role, go online and search Teaching Vacancies Gov UK.
This show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit hachetlearning.com to explore the full range of titles.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
Schools Week reports on delays to SATs marking, with maths markers drafted in to assist with grammar, punctuation and spelling tests. Contractor Pearson sought the support after what Schools Week reports as weeks of technical glitches on the new ModMark marking platform. Pearson took over the £180 million SATS contract from Capita this year. The marking deadline had already been extended, but the article says that tens of thousands of questions remained unmarked. The same publication also reports that a considerable reduction to the amount schools contribute to teachers' pensions is highly likely following a revaluation of the scheme by ministers. According to the article, teachers' contributions and pension pots are not expected to change. Schools currently pay a fee equivalent to 28.6% of teachers' wages every year into the teachers' pension scheme. Skills Minister Jackie Smith said the rate is expected to drop and any change would come into effect next April and would remain in place for 4 years. News of the anticipated savings schools will make comes as the sector waits for the government's decision on teacher pay for September. The BBC covers the story of a private tutor who charged money to sit dozens of exams for students and submit coursework for them. The man has been jailed for 3 years after the scam earned him £300,000. He sat the assignments and tests for more than 120 students at Liverpool John Moores University, but was caught after a student handed in a USB drive containing suspicious coursework to a professor in the university's School of Computer Science and Mathematics. Finally, the BBC Scotland News website covers the story of a private school in Moray, which will close due to financial pressures. The school in Forres was co-founded by Oscar-winning actress Tilda Swinton and focused on more alternative, practical learning rather than pupils sitting tests. Trustees have announced that its kindergarten would finish at the end of June, following the closure of its upper and lower school provision earlier this year. A spokesperson for the trustees said that the VAT on school fees policy brought in by government had been hard to bear and that they had not been able to establish the financial foundations necessary to continue. This has been Teachers Talk Radio News with Jo Fox.
Welcome back to Teachers Talk Radio. I am Konstantinos Pappas, and tonight I'm speaking with Dr. Frania Hall about teaching as scholarship and the recognition of teaching excellence in higher education. Before the break, we spoke about evaluation and pedagogic scholarship. I would now like to turn to recognition and academic identity. So, Frania, do you think teaching-focused academics, they do receive the recognition they deserve within higher education?
Well, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because I think that there are always a lot of things that are going on to try and recognize the great teaching that goes on, whether it's like teaching awards that might happen in your local sort of faculty or whatever that may be voted on by students, for example. There are sort of various things, and we'll have a think in a moment about things like the sort of advanced HE fellowships and sort of things like that. But overall, I think people still can feel that it's not as recognized as a person on a research pathway, even though they are doing a lot of work. And to some extent, people aren't necessarily themselves helping themselves by thinking of what they do as pedagogic research, but in a way it is because they're seeing these things happening. They are getting feedback from students that is in many ways data as rich as a research project. And I do my academic research in publishing, but I also do it in education. But I think possibly it's one where teachers can often feel a little bit conflicted because they think, but I still have my research stuff that I do, I'm just not on a research pathway. There's all these sort of dilemmas about, well, how do I evidence this stuff that I'm doing in the classroom to make it sort of worthwhile? I think recognition is getting better all the time, and there's a lot more opportunities now that are being presented to the wider.
Yes.
There are conferences, there are journals, and and we can sort of go for them, but we've needed a bit of encouragement to do that, because we haven't necessarily thought about our teaching practice in a sort of strategic way as well for ourselves and our career development, as much as our sort of, well, this is our day-to-day stuff that I do anyway, so it's not that special. But what we need to do is make people realize that people on the teaching pathway, it is special. I think there's a lot more emphasis now in terms of how important the sort of teaching is for student experience, for students to sort of be able to have resilience, to move into the world of work. All of that, there's definitely a recognition that's getting, it's going in the right direction, definitely. But I'm not sure that we're there quite yet.
That's really hopeful. I think you're right. There is better recognition, but maybe there's not enough celebration yet. And maybe we could work on that, because as you said many times, colleagues that they are on teaching pathway, as you said, they do research on the discipline plus on pedagogy and on teaching, which kind of could be discouraging, let's say. And since you mentioned discipline oriented research, I would like to see how you bridge the pedagogic research and scholarship with broader institutional and even maybe sector-wide change. Do you think pedagogic research and scholarship can contribute to this type of change?
Yes, I do, and I think there's a lot of recognition of it. I mean, a lot of institutions will have teaching and learning conferences as well, which sort of really try to draw out these moments. But I think for the broader sector, there's a lot of. I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm generalising massively, but we've probably all been in institutions where a sort of education strategy comes down, and it's built on good and sound thinking, but a lot of people can feel it's quite top down, but actually we're all doing research in this area, and the more that we can make it visible, and but because we're teaching in new and interesting ways, the more we can make it visible and the more it can be celebrated, the sort of innovative stuff that we're doing in whatever way we want to celebrate it. We don't all have to write a journal article. Then it is not top down, it can be bottom up. We can be sort of feeding the new ideas up. They just need to be made a bit more visible, because I think they're sort of all there. So I think there's definitely a role that we can, that the scholarship has to help the sector think about things. We also recognise that students change all the time. Who is closest to the students? The tutors who are with them, on a regular basis. So when we think of a topic like AI and how we're going to teach that, a very sort of plastic topic, we've got to be nimble, we've got to be flexible, and actually we're doing a lot of curriculum design on the hoof, and that is really valuable to feed back up, as it were, and to sort of alert people to the information that they need to be able to make policy. So I think there's a lot of opportunity. We do need to do a lot more celebrating. I mean, we have, for the media school, a blog which puts all the amazing things that people are doing on there, and with data to back up why these things are working well, or what bit of it's working well in terms of evaluative data, and that's helping sort of celebrate. There's still a bit of a gap, I think, between the sort of top type way of thinking about education strategy and the sort of stuff that we're doing on the ground. And in a way, I'm always interested in how we bridge that gap. And I think the teaching pathway can be that route to bridging that gap between what's sort of done on a day-to-day basis and what's happening strategically at the sort of higher level, and how we can inform, policy, whether we can, hopefully we can bring sector-wide change, but it's certainly we're getting a lot of understanding of pedagogy at our on a day-to-day basis. So we need to be using that effectively to think about future strategies.
I particularly liked your idea about the bottoms-up approach when it comes to shaping, the wider sector, or maybe even policies, because you are totally right. I mean, who else can know better the students than their own teacher? So that bottoms-up approach can be a very effective one. I know you already mentioned some professional recognition schemes, such as the Advanced HE Fellowship. Do you think that this plays an important role in supporting teaching-focused careers?
I think it does in various ways. There's those things. There's people doing PG certs. There's people doing MA academic practice, and they're offered by our university, for example, as a way to recognise that teaching and pedagogical research and scholarship is really key. So those are all places where people are getting sort of recognition. But if you do something like an advanced HE fellowship application, they are a minefield of trying to hit all the right points and illustrate, and provide the evidence and the impact for everything you do. They're quite complicated sort of pieces of work, but I think that makes you, when you do one of those applications, think quite closely about your own practice and suddenly realize, wow, I'm doing all these things. Hopefully it's a sort of confidence building thing as well, and to recognize that, yeah, that is pedagogic research. I hadn't really framed it in that light before, but now I see that it is, sort of reframing what they're already doing in a way that suddenly sort of presents it. So to some extent, there's the reflective process of it is helpful, as well as the fact that it is really meaningful in the industry, and the institutions give it recognition. I think that it deserves when you do get an advanced HE fellowship or an academic practice. The thing that doesn't quite happen is that when people have done interesting things and they put them in their fellowship application, or they've done an amazing research piece for their academic practice, it doesn't always get disseminated. So it sits there because people don't automatically think, like they might if it was a research project, oh, I'll write a journal article, or I'll write a blog item for a policy blog or something. It just sort of rather sits there. So that's something else that we want to sort of draw out to show that all these interesting things are going on. I think it's again, people tend to think, oh, I know if I'm on the research pathway, I know what to do. I'll go to some conferences, I'll present some papers, I'll write a journal article, and then you start getting funding. That's quite challenging for teaching pathway to suddenly think about, how am I going to get funding for projects, which is one of the challenges for the teaching pathway. But all the other stuff one can easily do. It's just that one isn't always realizing that one could do that. I mean, you and I go to education conferences, but there's a lot more people who could easily be at those conferences and meeting great interdisciplinary people, but they're not always thinking in that way, and that's what we need to encourage people to do.
Exactly, you're absolutely right. In fact, when you were talking about the advanced HE fellowships and the reflection that this offers to us, actually that was the biggest recognition. Talking from my experience, I just finished with my senior fellowship. It was successful. Yes, I'm very happy.
Hey.
Yay! I'm really happy about that. But it gave me such an opportunity to reflect on what I did well. And it gives you also the tools to express that with the words needed. You understand how things take shape. What we were talking about earlier. I am doing things in the classroom, but I don't know that necessarily these things are innovative, or that they are pedagogically informed, or that they advance, let's say, teaching, which is really important. Yes, you are right. The reflection on these things, it's actually a self-encouragement. Apart from the recognition from your institution, it's also a validation for yourself. And I know you already talked about the challenges that colleagues considering a teaching-focused pathway might face. But what about the opportunities that colleagues considering a teaching-focused pathway, what opportunities could they be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of things. And you can still bring your own discipline into it. I mean, your discipline can lead to a way of teaching. So for me, publishing, when I work with publishing materials with students, and it's sort of giving a legitimacy to the thing that they're thinking about or writing, or a personal experience or whatever. So they're making a publication, and that is leading to them understanding something more about their subject, because they're having to articulate it in a published way, for instance. So you can bring your discipline in, but what people are learning is around how they can retain information by recasting it in a published environment. I've recently looking at with a colleague on a journal article about publishing and design pedagogy and how that has informed our way of teaching. So again, a teaching sort of thing. But the opportunities are, in many ways, to think about it like a research pathway, but just doing it around your pedagogic practice. So there are so many conferences that look at education, and to me it was a complete revelation how many there were out there that are going to be really interested, and they take different angles, maybe student experience or student journey, or thinking about inclusion, or thinking about creativity. There's so many opportunities there, and we've got a great central team now that really focus on drawing those links, of collecting all those conferences, so which you might never realize they're all sort of out there and really welcoming, and really opportunities for you to start to hone in on something that you're doing that could be relevant. And you might be doing something maybe on employability, or you may be thinking about something about sort of ethics. Those are all going to find spaces in these sort of conferences. So I think that's a really nice place to see an opportunity to develop that pathway. And then do some writing. But again, you can do different types of writing. You're not sort of always bound by the journal article. I think teaching writing happens in different ways, in different sort of contexts. And again, as I said, blogs or policy pages, or there's a lot more discussion and debate. So I think if you're on the teaching pathway and you're trying to build up that sense of being recognised for that teaching pathway, those are some of the opportunities. It's not as obviously scaffolded as the research pathway often, but actually you can create a sort of scaffold for it. And it's obviously always interesting because you get very quickly results, because in terms of you can test something out and you can very immediately see, did it work? So the research is happening every day in the classroom. So that's an opportunity. You've got a lot of, as it were, sounds a bit formal, but data happening through your teaching and through those conversations with students. Thinking about ways to capture those things in a robust way is the thing that I'm interested in, actually, to help people illustrate what they're doing in an evidence-informed way.
I think you're absolutely right when you talk about, when you say that the research pathway is much more straightforward. Everything is scaffolded, everything is there for you. Whereas in the teaching pathway, the idea that you have to contribute to the scaffolding of it might be, let's say, a bit more challenging. It might sound more challenging, or it might, on the contrary, sound much more creative, because you get to have a saying, you get to participate in how you shape it. And I want to retain two very interesting points that you made that can be huge opportunities for colleagues teaching to go on and choosing to go on a teaching pathway. One is combine your discipline through a pedagogic lens. So it's a win-win situation. You get to advance into your discipline with, in the same time, with pedagogic research. And then the second one that you mentioned about the plethora, the abundance of education conferences that people can go, participate, network, advance their skills, their knowledge. So it's not, it goes down to what you said, that the research pathway is straightforward. There's this, that's what everybody does, go do it. The teaching pathway, you build, you create. So we are going to pause again briefly for teaching, for Teachers Talk Radio messages from our supporters. Please stay with us, because after the break, we will look ahead with Frania and ask her what needs to change if higher education is to value, support, and celebrate teaching excellence more fully.
As teachers, we know the barriers girls face go far beyond the classroom. That's why the FA and Barclays Made for This Game Breaking Barriers campaign is taking on two of the biggest barriers girls face today: misogyny and body confidence. Right now, 56% of teachers say they don't feel confident discussing these topics with their students, and that's exactly where this campaign can help. With free, easy-to-use resources and a podcast designed for busy teachers, Breaking Barriers gives you practical support to help start the conversations, creating more positive environments for girls in school, in sport, and beyond. It's time to empower girls to believe they belong. Go to girlsfootballinschools.org and click on Made for This Game.
In education, we all want recruitment to be fair and inclusive because the gender pay gap won't disappear without clear, practical steps in how we hire. Recent national research shows schools are already taking meaningful action. 40% of leaders now include pay or progression details in adverts. 35% highlight well-being support, and around 1 in 5 are using anonymised shortlisting to reduce bias. Teaching vacancies, the Department for Education's free official job listing service, makes these steps easier with clear salary fields, flexible working filters, and an application format that supports blind recruitment. It also removes previous salary questions so candidates are assessed on their skills and experience rather than their past pay. For your next hire or your next role, go online and search Teaching Vacancies Gov UK.
This show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit hachetlearning.com to explore the full range of titles.
So welcome back. You are listening to Teachers Talk Radio, and I'm in conversation with Frania Hall about teaching us scholarship, about evaluation, recognition, and teaching-focused academic careers. So, Frania, in this final part of the show, I'd like us to look forward and ask you, what changes would you like to see in the way higher education, values, supports, and celebrates teaching excellence?
That's quite difficult, isn't it? I think overall it is this trying to build a pathway or a teaching, recognizing teaching excellence, which doesn't just sort of copy. We've talked about the fact that it feels like often when you're doing teaching pathway stuff, you're having to think about how you do things in the same way a research framework person would be thinking about. Whereas actually it's just a different arena. There needs to be different criteria that are used to judge teaching and learning, or to consider teaching and learning, or to present success in teaching and learning. And one of the things might be, for instance, recognizing creativity in a slightly different way, because creativity is happening in the classroom, all the time. It might be a creative thought, a planned creative sort of intervention, or it might be just the creativity of moving in that moment when you're sort of suddenly realizing that the class are going in an interesting direction and you're going to sort of take it that, go fluidly with it. Those are quite tricky things to sort of present in a formal sort of way. So I would like teaching to be celebrated for those interesting moments, those smaller qualitative pieces, without the expectation that they need to sort of fit all the format of a very straightforward sort of research project where you have to sort of prove all your data in a certain way. I suppose what I'm getting at there is there needs to be a slightly different methodology, or an expectation that we can use different methodologies in this sort of more fluid, more emergent sort of area. So that may be one thing. But having said that, having a slightly more scaffolded approach, having a few more things that make people really feel valued for their teaching would be good. And I think evaluation, for me, coming back to that, is one way to celebrate what people are doing, because that is evidencing it, but it's not evidencing it in a sort of really heavy-handed way. It's a much more involved partnership approach to recognizing what teaching excellence is. So I suppose it's in the process of the way we recognize that would be a change that I'd like to sort of see. Also, I think sometimes the journals that are out there, and there are an amazing range of really interesting journals that sort of specialize in particular areas. Again, they're they're not always so welcoming to slightly more multidisciplinary people who coming from their discipline but are doing interesting pedagogic stuff. They're sort of with the people whose lifeblood day in, day out is just their particular angle of pedagogic research. That is, again, a slightly different thing from us, you and I in the classroom, teaching in a particular way and learning from it and showing excellence. There's subtle distinctions that I think perhaps could be come to the fore a little bit more and be sort of scaffolded, I suppose, in a different way. I think, for instance, the TEF itself in the UK can feel quite potentially flagellatory, and we don't have a lot of autonomy about what we put forward for it in the same way as TEF does. So maybe there's something about that, but that's in the process of change anyway. So it may be more sort of inclusive going forward.
Amazing. Both examples of changes that you mentioned, they make absolute sense. I mean, the greater, let's say, the better scaffolding of the teaching pathway, alongside maybe journals that they are less resistant into publishing papers that touch also on the discipline of the researcher/teacher that submits a paper. Now, if you could challenge one misconception, let's say, about teaching-focused academic careers, what would that be?
I think it would be the fact that the teaching pathway always seems to be the default pathway. It's
You're
always
right.
you're on that. It's not quite the poor relation always, because I think people respect the pathway, but nevertheless, well, that's the default one. So you have to make the active step towards the research one, or if you have it, the KE one, knowledge exchange one. But the teaching one should also be an active step. I've chosen that. That's certainly how I feel about it. I do my own publishing research as well, so I do stuff that potentially go into the ref. But I've made an active step to be on the teaching pathway, and I guess it's not quite a misconception, but that is sort of, teaching is just the normal, slightly boring one. I want to challenge that.
You're right. Yes, there is some misconception about that we should stop treating it as the default pathway. It has to be an active choice. Exactly. And finally, let's close on a positive note. Let's say this very interesting discussion. What gives you personally optimism about the future of teaching and learning in higher education?
Well, we know there's lots of change, and although AI may make people think, oh no, that's their heart sinks about how they're going to deal with it, if we can swap that around, it's an area of interest that we are learning at the same time with the students. Like I was saying earlier, we have to have confidence that we can actually understand and present good ways to learn and good ways to, because if we don't do that, how is anybody going to learn about how best to use AI for the future of the world? But thinking about AI in terms of its creativity, or ethically, or environmentally, or academically, or employability ways, it's not about that we're all going to use AI to do our teaching. I don't mean that. I just mean it's an area where it's actually quite interesting for us to intellectually engage with that. So if we're thinking about teaching and learning, we need to be thinking about how that can be embedded in where it should be and where it shouldn't be, and all those sorts of things. So there's that. And that is reflective of the fact that the world's changes quickly anyway. It's a much more fluid thing. Students are sort of changing, so we have to be innovative on a regular basis. Well, I think that's really nice. I think that's exciting, rather than just sort of set up your lecture and then run it for the next 10 years. I'm optimistic about the fact that we should be always innovating. And I think for students, what that means is that they can have much more of their own journey, and we can facilitate them to have a much more own sort of personalized or differentiated journey. And I think that teaching and learning is much more there's much more connectivity now between where people have come from, where they're going to, and then this transition moment when they're in their learning environment that we can really help facilitate with. that we're all learning together. And overall, I see this as a sort of space where we can really build, because we're so conscious or we're so intentional about our teaching and learning. Actually, if we do that in the right way, we can have these really positive relationships. We have these conversations with students, and that sets us all up to be able to sort of face the future in an intelligent and creative and sort of productive way.
Amazing, Frania. Thank you so much. I couldn't agree more with this positive note on which we are closing this discussion for now. I mean, maybe not on this show, but definitely we will have a lot to talk about, the two of us, in the future, and maybe invite you again to this show, because I feel that we didn't talk about everything yet. And I'm sure yes, exactly. And I'm sure many listeners will want to hear more from you. So we'll definitely have that in mind. Thank you so much for joining me today on Teachers Talk Radio. This has been such a thoughtful and important conversation.
Thank you very much for having me, and good luck to everybody out there. Come on, Teaching Pathway. We can make this world of teaching and learning scholarship really happen.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Frania, and thank you to everyone for listening. You have been with Teachers Talk Radio. I am Konstantinos Pappas, and I look forward to speaking with you again soon. Goodbye. Have a good evening, everyone.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.